First and foremost was when I was in high school in the 60s, we'd been raised in schools and trained to be silent. And when I wanted to speak out, and I did, I usually got sanctioned. So I'd get sent home, I'd get sent to the principal's office, I'd get detention, whatever. And what dawned on me was that I had a lot to say, and I wasn't the only person who had a lot to say about what was going on in the schools. And what I learned was the administrators, teachers, didn't want to give voice to us, and they tried to silence us. When I went off to college, it only was exacerbated in college, where the education leaders didn't want to listen to college students. And here you thought, well, wait a minute, I'm so much older now and more sophisticated, and of course they're going to listen to what we have to say. But it really wasn't different than high school. But that all broke down. And then when I entered the classroom as a teacher, I remembered, of course, what it was like when I was in high school. And I was committed to not being somebody who silenced student voices, but somebody who gave them a voice. So I think it was my own education experience as a young teenager, and then even as a college student, that really informed what I became as a teacher. I know that there were many ways that students were giving me feedback. Sometimes it was an expression, like, of boredom. You can tell when somebody's looking at you out of boredom, or their body language tells you, like they're falling off the side of their chair asleep. Well, whatever. You learn from both their affect, but also sometimes I can remember my first year at Wayland High School, and my first day, opening day, there was a college U.S. history class. And I can remember this young woman, Donna, saying, after I've spoken for about 5 or 10 minutes about what the course was going to be about, and she said, this is boring. She says it out loud. She says, this is boring. And I thought, she's right, it is. But I explained to her, I'm just kind of like telling you what we're going to do this year as opposed to doing it. So I promise to do my best not to be boring, but right now you're right, it is. And I thought she had every right to, I guess she could have done it a little bit differently, but she was right on target, and I didn't think she was the only one who was bored. I was probably bored doing it, laying the framework for what's going to happen across the year and all this sort of stuff. So sometimes they do that, or sometimes they're afraid to speak out. Most students are afraid to do that. I gave her credit, at least. She said her piece. They'll write it. And what I learned was, by listening to them, when they found their voice, it gave me at least something to think about, and then think about how I could alter, whether it's my curriculum, the manner that we present a class. There are many instances. If you need specifics more than that, I can give you some. When I was teaching on the Navajo reservation, and Navajo kids were raised not to find their voices, certainly in a classroom, and certainly not with an authority figure, an Anglo teacher. It was clear to me that I was going to have a problem asking them to tell me, with a language cultural barrier, what issues they might have with how I was teaching and the curriculum they were taking. So that's when I used surveys. I passed out, and I still have them in my collection of the student responses. I asked them what they liked most about class, what things we did in class that helped them learn and made them want to learn more, versus the things that weren't helping them out so much. And what I got back from the kids informed me for the years to come as well, because they were not very different from what I would later hear. It would be a lot of the same themes, and once you begin to hear the same themes over and over again, it becomes clear to you what the kids are looking for, which was what I was looking for when I was in school. I wanted to discuss more. I wanted more of student voices in the classroom, not just the teachers drone all the time. And I wanted something that related to my world. I was in high school during the Civil Rights Movement in the Vietnam War. I was signed up for the draft, and teachers wouldn't talk about Vietnam. And I'm thinking, okay, they're signing me up for the draft. They're going to send me to Vietnam, but schools won't tell me what this is about. Or there's on my screen, there are people dying for civil rights, and you want to talk about it, they say that's current events, that's not history class. Well, this makes no sense that schools don't relate to what's going on in the world for kids. A lot of my early training was experiential. And in classrooms that I worked in even before I was teaching my NAVAJO students, and well before I got to teach in a suburban school system such as Wayland. And when I taught with students who, at the time, they had different terms for it. They were called either educable or trainable retarded students. And the lowest IQs, those who are considered trainable as opposed to educable, would never be able to succeed in school with the normal reading, writing, arithmetic, but they need to be trained to use the bathroom, tell their adults when they're hungry, whatever basic fundamental needs they had. And the only way to teach them was to be in constant awareness of them. It was to listen to them, because the cues they gave you would not be usually verbal cues. They would give behavioral cues. So I need to pay attention. If somebody needs to use the bathroom, you don't want them to have an accident. A 12-year-old having an accident is really damaging to a child's self-esteem, and parents and schools and adults don't want to have to deal with that. But you had to pay close attention to them to know how to teach them. And then when I dealt with emotionally disturbed kids who could rip apart a classroom, and they did on occasion, start tearing things down or assaulting teachers and things like that, if you didn't, again, pay attention to them, you could not teach them. So that was my early training. And then culturally, the gap with NAVAJO students forced me to do other ways to get through to kids, also to learn how to teach you if you can't even communicate with me all the time on an English level. So by the time I got to a high school like Wayland High School, I was well versed in listening to my students, and they would teach me new things because they were coming from a different place. And absolutely, if you look at, as a teacher, I always broke it down this way. You're teaching children a subject. You're not teaching a subject to children. You're teaching children a subject. So your main focus should be that they are children, young adults. And if you're dealing with children, young adults, teenagers, and so forth, you've got to listen to them before they can listen to your subject and make sense of it. So absolutely, to me, that comes first. And when teachers lose sight of that and they think of this, it's a subject. I'm teaching you to be, what, a math teacher? I'm teaching you to be a scientist? No, I'm teaching a person who might someday choose to use this science or might relate to it today, or you may not. Well, I'll give you an example that used to help me or inform me when I was making up a test. And I hated that. I had to make these tests, but we dealt in a world where there were expectations. I had to provide evidence that I was testing and test results, and those test results were used to sort children to those who would graduate, those who would go on to the best institutions of higher learning, those who would go to the average schools, and those who would go to the bad schools. Here's the way I looked at it. We were looking at a chunk of material, let's say, content and skills. We're looking at skills and material. And what a test does is it takes a slice, and I always felt it was a very small slice of everything you could possibly ask somebody about, and have them show ways that they've learned a skill and some content that helps integrate with that skill. And if an average student could memorize and have the skills to handle, say, 50%, and you nailed, and they walk in there and say 40% of what they nailed of their 50 was on there, they were really going to do well. If a kid learned really well this 50% over here, though, and you took a slice out of this, that poor child is going to walk in and look like a failure. So how do I make a test that gives a student a chance to show what they're learning, not what I'm teaching? Because what you're teaching is not always what kids are learning. And once I got that, and it didn't happen to me overnight, it didn't happen to me in my first few years of teaching regular content, like at a high school level, but I altered how I tested, I altered how I evaluated children, because I needed to evaluate them on what they were learning as opposed to what I was teaching. And I'm not sure if that comes through, but it's true of almost anything. You can watch a movie and then have 5 people sit down and talk about what they just took away from that movie, and you'll get 5 different things. So whatever that movie maker was teaching in their movie, 5 people walked away with 5 different observations and maybe takes on it and learned something different. And if we were tested on just one of those, like, did you learn this? And 4 of the people say, no, I didn't learn that. Well, you failed. The person who learned that, you're the A student. That would do a disservice to those 4 who learned something different than what you intended, but they learned something. Doing that, to me, was a transformation in my teaching. If I were to talk to teachers, first off, as a former teacher, I recognize that every day I operated with tenure was a day I could do most of what I wanted to do, the way I wanted to do it. Now, that is becoming less and less true for teachers. It certainly isn't true for teachers who aren't tenured or don't have professional status, whatever they want to call it. Because the reality is, for classroom teachers, is their jobs are dependent on administrators and what administrators are looking for from teachers to keep them on board as part of their teaching staff. So this is a very difficult question, because you don't know whether or not you're working for a supportive administrator until they show you unequivocally that they do support children's voices. And teachers, first and foremost, are working to support their family. And I understand that they're not going to lose a job because they tried a technique or listened to student feedback and found themselves in trouble in terms of keeping their job because administrators didn't approve of this. So I really think administrators have to be the first people on board. If administrators don't value the voices of teachers, which I find that oftentimes they don't, they would have a hard time understanding the need to value the voices of children. And the further away you get from the children, the less likely you are to value them in terms of understanding them on a daily basis and their needs. So working with administrators would have to be an important part of this, and they would have to show support for teachers who do this in ways that evaluations show support, for techniques that they use, for the feedback that they bring from students, and ultimately the tests and all of that. I truly believe that the Common Core, MCAS, all of that, which attempts to standardize what children learn, takes away from one of the major things I learned about children is they don't all learn what we teach. They learn a lot of things that we don't even understand from what we're teaching. And we need to value that, and a test can't do that. So I think with if we go back to the ground level with students, and administrators understand that connection between children, a curriculum, and their teacher, and their feedback on that style, curriculum, and all the skills and so forth. Once they understand the true value there, then you won't need these tests, because they will understand that children are learning, and they're learning sometimes different things than we intend, but that doesn't make them less important or less valuable. And as long as they walk away with the critical skills, we understand that, the reading skills and the math skills, all the rest is the real important things about who they become and how they become as learners. So it starts at the top. They set the basic parameters under which teachers work, and they're under a contract to provide certain services. And if we're going to listen to kids, people at the top have to be on board with this Otherwise, teachers will follow, they follow the power. And if the power says we don't value student voices, and that's the word they get from administrators, and please don't tell me, as an administrator, we completely value student voices in everything we do in this district. Teachers know when that's true, and by the way, kids know it even better. They know when it's a facade, they know when it's genuine, and you can't fake it. And I've heard all the correct buzzwords. Every administrator knows them. I could fill in all the right things to say on an interview, and many teachers are trained now to do that as well. But the kids see through it. They do. The kids learn when you're serious and when you're not, when you're authentic and you're not, and they will not use their voices if they know that there are going to be consequences for them. Kids aren't stupid too. They're looking to survive. And those who don't, I used to say, sometimes my favorite students for getting a voice in the classroom were my D and F students, because they didn't give a damn about grades, and they didn't care if you were going to punish them for their voice, because you could. They just say what they were going to say. And hey, you want to fail me? Fail me. I'm going to fail it. I'm failing now. And I think, good for you, in a sense of, not that you're failing, but that you're willing to stand on your integrity rather than for a grade. And I would hope we want to promote integrity in schools as opposed to grade grubbing, but that's not often the case. So it's got to start with genuine, authentic belief in kids' voices and support for them. And they talked about how women, because they weren't allowed to keep their money, right, and boys were, fathers would take the girls' wages, but they wouldn't take boys, and so when the girls went out, it was called treating.
Right.
And
I remember this.
And
yeah,
what that meant, when you got a treat from a boy, you had to give him back a treat. And this plays out today in the modern world when you see a comedy and the guy takes a woman out to an expensive dinner, and then he expects, come on, I expect something from this, and everybody knows what's going on here. If I spent that kind of money on you, you know what I mean? I expect at least a kiss or a little bit more. If I take you to McDonald's, no, but...
And as a high school girl, I think it would be very important to learn the history of where that came from, essentially like being your father's bargaining chip or
yes,
whatever. Yeah.
It was really all about women in their lack of access to their own wages, actually, their own income. Boys weren't denied it. And so girls were put in a position, if they wanted an ice cream cone, they had to depend on a boy to buy it from them, and then they had to give up some of their dignity to do that. Yeah. Well, they already gave up their dignity when they gave their wages to their dad. I mean, what are you doing to women? Then I would find out totally, you give the same reading to 20 different kids, they learn 20 different things. And some of the times, they weren't things that I had learned from it, and sometimes they were, but basically, it taught me a lot about how students were reading the same piece that I had read and come away with different things. And so by the end of the year, I could just do this openly in a classroom, and I would ask the students to give me some feedback on how the year had gone for them and so forth. And this one girl, she was sitting off to the right side along that right wall. I can remember her, Dally, she raised her hand, and she said, Mr. Frio, I got to tell you, I appreciate all the work we did on race and history, on the realities of the current world and how it fits in with history, all that stuff. But I don't think you did justice to women. And I know I can still picture this in my head. I could already feel the guilt meter going up a little bit, like, yeah, she's right. And so I told her, I said, Dally, this is going to be for you. In the future, I'm definitely going to do more with women in history. And in that summer, I went out and found books that I could read, not just to teach me more, but that I could use with my students. And they would relate to, for example, Bachelor Girl, they could relate to being a teenage girl as opposed to a history book about famous women and all this kind of stuff. This is about just everyday girls who are trying to navigate the world of work and boys and all that kind of stuff. And I integrated some books into the curriculum. One of them was Memoirs of an Ex-Prom Queen, which I think a lot of schools would not use, a lot of teachers would not use because it has sex in it and cursing and stuff. But it was from a girl's perspective, a woman's perspective, and a lot of female students read that book and loved it. And only one boy ever who read it. I don't know why he chose it, but he didn't quite get it. Not in the way the girls did, but he did give me a different perspective as a young male reading that book. So basically that inspired a whole new part of my curriculum. And she felt good enough saying it in class, which to me was what you hope for. And I'll give you one little last...
Okay.
Okay. It just made me think of something.
Yeah.
My last year of teaching, my principal, I was on this evaluation, so they were evaluating me. And the evaluation plan for me that year was I was to make up my own goal for the year. And so he said to me, what's going to be your goal this year? So I told him, my goal is to teach students how to fight the power. And he looked at me and he said, well, you know that your goal has to be evaluated. How do you intend to evaluate it? I said, I won't have to. I said, you'll know.